So we chose muscular dystrophy as our disability. It is a group of diseases actually characterized by weakness and degeneration of skeletal muscles. There's a few types: Becker, congenital, Duchenne's, Emery-Dreifuss, fascioscapular, humeral, limb girdle, myotonic, and oculopharyngeal. We're going to be focusing on Duchenne's because that's what our article is about, and it is one of the more common ones. So Duchenne's is an X-linked genetic disorder. It's characterized by the absence of dystrophin, which is the protein that keeps muscles intact. So if you lack dystrophin, the skeletal muscles become fragile and easily broken. Usually diagnosis is around 3 to 5 years of age, and it primarily affects male. It's very rare that if it affects a female. There's 3 diagnostic measures: CK, creatine kinase levels. So creatine kinase is an enzyme that's released during muscle breakdown. So if there's increased levels in the bloodstream, it's indicative of abnormal muscle breakdown, but it doesn't diagnose that it's MD. It may be an inflammatory disease. They don't know. It's just there's muscle breakdown. There's something going on. Let's further investigate. The next one is genetic testing. It is a genetics disorder, so they usually test blood cells to determine if there's a mutation in that dystrophin gene. Mothers actually can be tested prior to getting pregnant to see if they're carriers. And genetic testing is actually widely available in the U.S. And sometimes carriers, interesting fact, can display symptoms of Duchenne's like muscle weakness or heart issues, but later in life. So I thought that was interesting. And lastly, there's a muscle biopsy. So it's obviously the surgical removal of a small sample of muscle. This can actually differentiate between either an inflammatory disease or different types of MD. So example, it may be Duchenne's. No, it is Duchenne's if there's no dystrophin, but it may be Becker if it's partially functioning dystrophin. Prognosis is a little different now. It's usually they don't live past their teen years, but with advancements in technology in cardiac and respiratory care, people have been living into their 30s and 40s, going to college, having careers, having families, and then maybe passing away earlier than some of us would, but still living full, productive lives. So signs and symptoms. Early symptoms is they're late walkers, as well as there may be pseudo-hypertrophy of the calf muscles. That's a false enlargement due to abnormal muscle tissue containing scar tissue. They'll also seem clumsy and fall often. Once they do start walking, they may have difficulty climbing stairs, getting up from the floor, or have delayed running. In school-age children, they tend to be toe walkers with the waddling gait. They will also compensate by sticking their tummies out and rolling their shoulders back, so they have quite the stance. And they also have difficulty raising their arms. Also, school-age children around age 7 to 12, they'll start requiring wheelchairs with progressing needs. So maybe at first to conserve their energy, then it may be due to the inability to walk. Then eventually they'll have power wheelchairs, they'll attach vents once breathing becomes an issue. And in teen years, they'll also require other mechanical devices to support their limbs and trunk, such as a wheelchair or other devices. In pain and sensation, there's usually no pain involved with MD, though there is muscle cramping reporting. It's usually just treated with an over-the-counter pain reliever. Nerves are not involved. It's only skeletal muscle that's involved. Therefore, sensation is intact as well as bodily functions. So the control of bowel and bladder functioning, sexual functioning, and involuntary smooth muscle functioning. Heart and respiratory functioning. So there is cardiomyopathy in this. It happens later in the teen years. So it's weakening of the myocardium. This can happen. And scene. Cut here. And go again. Usually in the teen years, heart damage can become life-threatening. Respiratory functioning, usually declines around age 10. Those respiratory muscles start to weaken, but they won't complain of shortness of breath. Usually they'll complain of headaches, mental dullness, difficulty concentrating or staying awake, or nightmares. So those tend not to be telltale signs of respiratory dysfunction. But if you have an individual with MD, a child, maybe it should be looked into if they're reporting those symptoms. Also, with the difficulty with breathing, it may increase the difficulty to cough. This increases the risk of respiratory infections, which actually can quickly turn into something life-threatening, such as pneumonia. So that should be really considered while working with these individuals. And finally, learning disabilities. 1/3 of boys with DMD have learning disabilities. Very few have severe cognitive impairments. And doctors believe that the dystrophin abnormalities in the brain can cause cognitive and behavioral impairments. It's unsure why. And it's usually in 3 general areas: attention focusing, verbal learning and memory, and emotional interaction, all which we as OTs can work with.
School management can be anesthesia, braces, standing frames and wheelchairs, cardiac care, contractures, diet, exercise, learning disabilities, medications, physical and occupational therapy, respiratory care, and spinal curvatures. Impact on motor control, posture. Scoliosis usually appears after using wheelchair full-time, and lordosis sometimes seen in those who are still walking. Balance. Increasing risk of fall and injury due to physical fatigue and muscle weakness. Coordination. Poor and eye coordination leads to clumsiness, and which losing of muscle strength affect fine motor function, and activity limitation can lead to contractures.
So a research article that we found on this topic, the title is called Motor Learning from Virtual Reality to Natural Environment in Individuals with Duchenne's Muscular Dystrophy. The study examined or included 64 participants. 32 had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and 32 were typically developing. What they really wanted to find out from this study was to know whether or not virtual reality, if there are any improvements in motor tasks, if that improvement was able to be transferred from that virtual reality environment into the natural environment. So what they did here was they gave the participants a task, and the task was a timing task activity, and they used a computer to have the participants basically knock out blocks and one block at a time. So there were 10 blocks that were stacked all the way up, and the blocks would change from a white color to a green color, and as soon as the color turned green, they would they'd be prompted to do something, either wave their hand at a webcam to kind of knock that block off, or press a space bar to do that. And what they found was, for the individuals who had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, they showed great improvement compared to the typically developing group. And that was because they were hypothesizing that it was probably because the typically developing group are already performing at their optimal level, so that's why they didn't see any improvements there. However, they concluded at the end of the study that individuals with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy showed, well, first they showed an immediate enhanced performance in the natural environment right after they completed the task, and virtual environments can actually be used to enhance people's functioning in the natural environment. But they do emphasize in the study that the task in the virtual environment should be more difficult than the task practice in real life to get those results. And that concludes.
OTs can do passive stretching to increase joint flexibility and to prevent contractures. With individuals with MD, they can increase their strength to varying degrees, and they can work on static and dynamic balance activities.